Here we go. Non-linear chronological sequence of events in terms of movie timeline, screenplay, DJ with an Uzi for storyboard. Written by OSGOE, that's Once or Grove of 495. Opening, Underground, Secret Tunnels Network, 1970s, fade into 1980s. Simultaneity, US West and East. Year, date, origin, undisclosed. So, main character, MC. His name is MC. He's the main character. The very first backstory revealed is Time Space 1. Cub Scouts, codes and ciphers, hiking, fishing, hunting, outdoor mountaineering, outdoor survival, survival training, rock climbing, marine, water, navigation, elementary school, gifted program, computer programming, legacy systems, IBM. So this young man, he is part of a group of young children they're almost 9 years old, going on 9. And they're in a gifted program for kids with high IQ. They're brainy, they're nerdy, they're geeky, they're geeks, they're nerds. And the young man, he is essentially raised by his uncle, who the uncle has military background, graduated from a university, was in the U.S. military. And since the young man, MC, main character, central character, one of the main characters in the movie, because he lives with his uncle teaches him these outdoor survival skills. His uncle teaches him how to pitch a tent, how to go out into the hills and hike properly, and how to camp and build a campfire and things of this nature. His uncle is also very handy in terms of around the house maintenance, how to build things, how to put things back together, take things apart, how to fix things. His uncle is very skilled in that way. And so this young man lives with his uncle. His mother and father are both military, the main character's parents. And so the main character, he off and on is on military bases himself whenever he's with his mother. Father's just out of the picture, but they're both military. And the mother and father were never married. They were never actually legally married. So the young man doesn't really know his father. When he's with his mother, he's in different parts of the country at different military bases. When his mother's away out of country on government business, this young character stays with this uncle. The family lineage is a military family. World War II, grandfather and grandmother were both in the military. Other uncles in the Korean War. His own father was in the Vietnam War. The mother was Army and also Navy, operating at the SCI, that's top secret compartmentalized intelligence information, military intelligence. She's with the military intelligence community. So she's often overseas, works with diplomatic cables, works in black chamber cipher rooms and signals intelligence. She's with a group called REDCOM, which is this particular group of REDCOM is in Alaska as part of a readiness command for naval nuclear readiness. His grandfather, who passed when he was young, was a master of tradecraft himself. The grandfather taught woodworking, metal shop, design, engineering. And so the central character with his friends from this high IQ group of students starting in elementary school where they met, they actually technically met in preschool, going into elementary school, into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, going into third grade, on the cusp of being 9 years old. So these young children, these kids who hang out together in this brainy, nerdy, geeky group, they kind of congregate at times at the main character's family's property, where the grandfather who passed had a garage, this garage that was filled with woodworking tools and metalworking tools and all these tools that one would find in a garage that is replete with such tools. Everything you can think of, every conceivable tool that one could imagine for woodworking and metal shop working are present in this garage where these kids hang out and they kind of tinker around and they build things like go-karts and, weapons like nunchucks, from the ninja lore. So this group of kids, not only did they meet at a very young age and went to school together throughout grammar school, elementary school, they're in an aerospace defense high-tech corridor. The backyard is essentially Nintendo, Microsoft, Boeing corporations. It's Semiconductor Valley. It's Silicon Valley / Semiconductor Valley up and down that coastal region. At some point, the kids, they find a naval communications base tucked away on the other side of a tree line in the forest. by the main character's aunt, who has a property some miles down the road from the grandparents' estate. She's in a more secluded, forested, rural community that's rather idyllic. It's a very peaceful, forested, rural outlying area, and it's separate. Her property is separated by a junkyard. On the other side of this junkyard, scrapyard, is a naval communications base. And the kids, in their outdoor activities, doing exploration, just sneaking into different buildings and looking around for what's out in the elements, they come across this naval station. Though the aunt had this property since time immemorial, they never knew that there was this communications base so much until one day they come upon this communications base and they can't access it. It's there on the tree line. And so they just kind of wonder in amazement and think about what goes on there. And then they kind of scurry away. So later the kids, with their high IQ, with their acumen, taking computers apart, building computers, putting broken computers back together, fixing these computers, they also are part of this phone freaking culture of making prank calls, using the old telephone system to pick up phones, dial on the telephone system, and just randomly dial people and make these prank calls. They're calling girls that they have, known from school. They have their telephone numbers, or they find their telephone numbers, and it's just this innocent kind of pranking that's going on. They call local businesses, they call people in the community, and they're just randomly dialing their kids, doing prank calls back in the 1980s. And so one day, one of the kids stumbles upon this. He's just, doot, 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 just dialing random, 8 digits. Not even thinking that he's actually dialing a telephone number. And just kind of like subconsciously just playing around, phone freaking, and then at some point is just like pressing keys on the telephone. And all of a sudden, the background where there was a dial tone, it blacks out. It's just gone. And he's thinking to himself, that's very odd. Why is there no dial tone? And he's just listening. He doesn't hang up. And some minute and some seconds later, he hears someone pick up a phone and this person starts to dial. And he's thinking, it's really fucking weird. Like, how can I hear someone dialing a telephone and calling someone? So he listens in. He listens in. He's fucking perplexed and puzzled as to how this is actually taking place. And he listens to this random conversation. And he's like, what the fuck have I just figured out? So he immediately calls one of his closest friends out of this group of these high IQ nerds. And he says to his friend, hey, look, man, I just fucking found out this thing that's totally fucking crazy. You gotta listen to me. And he's like, all right, tell me about it. So he's like, look, man, I fucking dialed this number, 36366363, and it blacks out the dial tone. The dial tone disappears, and you can hear people calling on the phone. And his buddy's like, what do you mean? Like one of those like party lines? Like those chat things that like usually cost money? And he's like, no, man, I don't think so. I think it's some other thing. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, how is it like you can hear people talking? So isn't that one of those like chat lines? Like, does he think it's some kind of back door to a chat line? And he's like, no, I don't think so, because here's what's really weird. Now, keep in mind, these kids are high IQ. The emphasis is that they're smart. They basically have young adult brains. And so they know things that the average child would not know. And he says, look, man, the thing is like you can hear people rummaging around in the room when you dial this code. And you can hear like them rustling around, moving papers around, moving materials around. You can hear them when they start to dial, you can hear them in the living room, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, wherever they have the phone. You can hear the movement in the room prior to the telephone call. So like you can literally hear rustling about and people rummaging through their personal belongings in their private residences, in their private spaces. And so how the fuck is that even possible? And his friend's like, I know, like what? So continue, like go, like, what do you mean? And he's like, it's like there's a microphone that you can listen in on. It's like the room is bugged, but how the fuck would that even, like, how is that working? Like, why would that be the case? It's like, and these kids, they're able to infer and deduce and decode this information, given that it doesn't make any sense. They understand that this is something that they just can't wrap their minds around. They know that it doesn't make any sense for this code to be allowing for this to take place, because keep in mind, this is in the 1980s before the internet. The internet didn't exist at this time in history. Even in this parallel universe, the ability to communicate with people over the internet did not exist. And since it did not exist, the internet, the only thing that was equivalent was Telnet. And Telnet at the time was very rudimentary. It was something that computer programmers would use on a very basic level in terms of computer legacy systems. There was no worldwide global communications. Telnet was used by a handful of individuals on the planet, a subset of people on this planet, even this timeline, this particular universe, and there was no high-speed internet. There was no World Wide Web. The internet, as it was at the time, was a means of communication that was accessible to the military and government only. And it was used by scientists at remote locations to communicate with one another at disparate remote locations. And so, given that it was a military government product exclusively, these kids during this 1970s era going into the 80s, early 80s, they have no fucking idea how this could be possible. It's as if during the Cold War, the government of that timeline, and keep in mind this is a parallel universe of Earth, but nonetheless, it's very similar to the timeline that you may remember from the 1970s and 80s. It's as if the government had bugged everyone's home and had a way to dial in to everyone's home, but also not just everyone's home, had a bug placed conveniently next to their telephone, which is an impossibility. We know that our government, even in a parallel universe, did not place a bug, in other words, a microphone, next to someone's telephone, because what if the telephone moves? Then what? They have to send out a government agent to every household in America to move the microphone? Of course not. That doesn't even mathematically make any sense. So the point is that these kids, they understand that what they have discovered makes no scientific sense in the world of science, physics, mathematics. It just doesn't. Yet, notwithstanding, they're able to listen in on people who are in the process of making a telephone call and then listen to that actual subsequent call. Okay. So these children they're just tripping. They're just like, what the fuck is this thing? And so they talk among themselves throughout the day, throughout the night, when they meet up at school, on the playground, during recess, after school, before school, and they talk about this and they keep this information to themselves. They don't share it with anyone else because they're spooked about it. At first, it's a novel thing where they're listening to these seemingly random conversations, but by the same token, they increasingly have this feeling that this thing that they have access to is dark and it's dangerous, and they're concerned that they're being monitored by the government. They just kind of, they're still kids with young adult minds, and so they push the envelope and they do these things that they know that they're not supposed to do, and then one day it just kind of hits them, like they just have this collective group like epiphany, like this aha moment, like, oh shit, man, we've gone too far with this thing. We have to have been being monitored the entire time that we've done this. Sure enough, at some point, one of the persons who's being listened in on, he gets tipped off. He just hears something, at least in their minds, that's what they believe, because there's a twist to it. And this voice says to them, hey, is there someone else on the phone? And sure enough, there is them, right? And it is they. And they say, at some point, they're just kind of like snickering among themselves in the background, and they decide to entertain the notion of communicating with this person. And they're like, yeah, man, we're here with you. And he's like, the fuck? Like, what? You got who is this? And they're like, oh, well, we're listening, man. We're here with you. And they're like, how the fuck did you get on my phone? Like, this is weird. Like, what are you kids? Like, listening on, like, how are you doing this? And the kids decide to tell this person and his buddy's there with him also. And he's like, yeah, I hear these guys. Like, who the fuck are these kids? And the kids are like, yeah, we're using a supercomputer. We're using a supercomputer to listen to you. And so these adults are like, the fuck are you talking about, a supercomputer? Like, that doesn't, what? How, you're children, right? Like, you're obviously kids. Like, what's a supercomputer? Like the size of a grocery store? Because back then, supercomputers were the size of a grocery store. And they could count to like 4. They were very fucking basic, right? It's like a dinosaur with the pea brain. Like, they couldn't really do shit At least that's what mainstream society was told. And so these adult men who learn that there are children on the phone listening in on their conversation, they're hearing this story that sounds like a red herring. It's a fanciful fucking story, if there ever was one. And they're like, what do you mean, a supercomputer? And so these kids are like, yeah, we're using a supercomputer. And they're like, how is that? How is that possible? How do you have a supercomputer? And how the fuck are you using a supercomputer to listen to us? And so these kids are like, well, we're in a program. And we have access to this computer, and it's a supercomputer. And they realize that their story is wearing thin. And they don't really have any information to back up this story, to substantiate it. And, quite frankly, even though these children are very skilled with taking computers apart, putting them back together, consumer electronics that one can purchase off the shelf, they don't fucking really know how a supercomputer works. So they're just making up this story. One of the kids is like, hey, just, hang up the phone. Like, we're talking too, we're telling too much to these guys. We're telling these guys too much shit, and it doesn't even make sense, and they know it. So just hang up the phone, man, and we're going to get in fucking trouble. So the other kids are like, yeah, okay. So they hang up the fucking phone. Now they're more spooked than ever because now they have told someone for the first time that they're on the phone listening in on conversations. And these people they're thinking are probably going to go to the police. They're going to go to the FBI. They're going to go to the authorities and tell them, hey, some fucking kids were listening to us and that ain't right. And you need to trace this call. So now they're deeply fucking concerned that they're in some deep shit. They're in hot fucking water, deep fucking trouble, big trouble. So they're scared and they're thinking like, do we even fucking do this thing anymore? We probably shouldn't. But of course, given their curiosity, they're going to do it again. But when they do, they're scared as shit. They have trepidation about it and they don't even know in their, child minds, they don't even really know why they're doing it again, other than there's the curiosity, they have access to it, but they think that they're going to get in trouble the more they do it. And so they do it a few more times, and then at some point they, and they're talking to people again, telling people shit, but it's not so much this thing about supercomputers. They're just telling people that they're on the phone like, hey, yeah, we're listening to your conversation. Haha, joke's on you. And people are like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, that's not right. Like, how did you do it? And then they'll just quickly hang up the phone. Later, they say to themselves, all right, man, this shit's gone fucking absolutely far enough. It's done. We can't do this anymore. Why would we even have done this thing after the first time that we told these people that we're doing this? So they decide they make a pact to seal it off. Like, they're not going to do it ever again. And they're going to keep this thing a secret. And in addition to the secret that they decide to keep, this childhood pact, they say to themselves, we have to find out how this thing works. Like, it's so fucking mysterious. Like, it doesn't make any kind of fucking logical sense that we were able to do this thing in the first place. We have to learn whatever we can in science. We gotta do research. Like, one day we gotta fucking figure out what this whole thing was about. So that's the first backstory. That was the Cold War. So are you ready for the twist? Here it goes. You're probably thinking, Rob, man, that sounds like some fucking Stranger Things type shit, man. Come on, some kids and they're like kind of nerdy and it's like back in the 80s. So here's the deal. No, period. It's not fucking Stranger Things. There are no monsters in this. Period. There's no fucking monsters. There's some weird shit when they travel through hyperspace at some point, but there are no fucking monsters or demons or anything of that level. Okay? The other thing is that there's gang shit in this movie. This shit takes place on the streets and on exoplanets in alternate parallel dimensions. There are fucking Uzis. This is an R-rated movie. This shit is not some PG-13 thing. This is a fucking R-rated movie. This shit is violent. This involves government conspiracy shit. It involves other universes. It involves high technology that was created on timelines that pre-exist what you know to be Earth timelines. Okay? Ancient fucking technology that's zillions of years old. It's not an homage to Stranger Things. This is not Stranger Things. And here's the twist. On the telephone, the voice. This is the first twist, and I'm giving this away to the audience as the screenplay is being written. I know the entire story. I'm mapping it out in sections for the audience to show you the creative process that I undergo when I'm developing my art, my writing, my composition. I'm showing you step by step how I do my process, how I do my flow in terms of character development, in terms of pre-development. I went through the gamut of information on the internet and I looked at how to write a screenplay. I've talked to someone for more than 20 years now who schooled me on the necessity to look at the textbook and to know the craft of screenplay, writing, composition, writing scripts to movies. So I'm doing this properly. My characters are not fucking dry, okay? My characters are going to be glamorous. My characters are going to be very dynamic. Their backstories are going to be ultra fucking dope. Now, I said before, this is an homage to a lot of different movies. It's intentionally an homage to a lot of different movies. But, nonetheless, it's completely fucking altogether, on the other hand, different than anything that's ever been done before. I grew up in the United States. I'm in my early 40s. I've seen fucking most of the sci-fi movies that have ever been made, most of the action movies that have ever been made. I grew up in front of a fucking cable box with the old analog HBO Showtime movie channel, okay? Cinemax, fucking, whatever it was that was on cable at the time. I've seen all that shit, man. Most of it, a lot of it. So, I've seen the movies, I've seen the formulas. This is different. I'm doing something unprecedented, okay? Yes, there's a little tinge of Escape from New York. Yes, there's a little tinge of Buckaroo Banzai. Yes, there's some Flight of the Navigator, Disney Black Hole, fucking Sliders, Quantum Leap. There's a bunch of shit interspersed throughout this movie. It's meant to be that way. This movie has twists to it that have never been fucking done before. The telephone conversation, this is twist number 1 for my audience, for people that actually fucking know that this is gonna be and is some of the raddest shit ever fucking penned, ever written. The telephone calls that these kids are making, the voices that they're hearing when they're making these prank calls, when they've tapped into this thing that they've tapped into. It's not a living being. They're not real humans who these kids are talking to. It's a fucking AI computer system from a parallel universe. Now, they're already in a parallel universe. So people who don't listen to this and then they see the movie that I make, they won't even know this shit. They'll be watching it for the first time with no information. You, my audience, who have gotten this far in the writing process, you're hearing this firsthand, and you'll know this shit when the ebook is made, when the graphic novel is made, when the comic book is made, when the fucking movie is made and it comes to the big screen. You'll know this in advance. This is one of the biggest twists of the movie. You're led to believe that these kids are talking to these human beings. They're not even fucking close to human. This is not even set in the universe of Earth that you know. Everyone who hasn't fucking read the synopsis, who hasn't read the backstory, who doesn't know exactly what this movie's 100% about, and I'm not going to give it away even to you up front. Like, I'm not going to give away the last part of the movie or all the secrets, but I'm giving you some of them in advance. So one of the biggest twists of the movie toward the beginning is that you think that these are people that they're talking to on the phone, that these kids are talking to. And it's not. It's a fucking supercomputer that's super advanced AI from another parallel universe. Because keep in mind, they're in a parallel universe of Earth. I can't really overemphasize that. This isn't Earth that you know. But audiences who don't know the backstory, they're going to think that it's Earth because I'm making it so that they believe that it's Earth. Okay? It's not. And the trailer that I make, the actual, trailer that will be on fucking, the internet in a large way, that won't reveal any of this information that I'm revealing to you. So they're going to think that it's regular Earth that they know. It's not. And not only that, but this supercomputer is actually tapped into their spectrum from a third universe. And it was looking for them for millions of years through these algorithms that this supercomputer has been sorting through for eons, looking for these children in this one particular universe. And it literally took that computer millions of fucking years to locate these children in this other parallel universe. And the way that it reaches out to them and their child minds is by way of understanding that these children are connected to this telephone pranking culture. It detects them, their voices on the telephone grid, and when the kids are randomly dialing some shit that they are in fact randomly dialing through retrocausality, retrocausation, through space-time, continuous events, that's what it's all about, is the continuum of time-space. This computer identifies that and instantly locks into it. And that's how this supercomputer begins to communicate with these children by leading these children in the 1980s of another Earth parallel timeline to believe that they're talking to these people and that they're pranking them. It's a computer talking to them, pretending to be these different individuals. Okay? And so what's happening is that these kids are being steered in a direction to then become scientists later on in the future to find out what this event was that took place during their childhood. And during the course of these children becoming scientists through the educational process, they are indoctrinated with certain information that one wouldn't normally be indoctrinated with in the process of becoming a scientist. Keep in mind, these kids into their adult years are trying to figure out how they were able to listen in on people in their homes, in these very strategic locations. So what didn't occur to the kids, for anyone out there who's looking at continuity of storyline, there is no problem with this in the realm of physics, because what the kids don't understand in their child minds before they're young adults is that it was theoretically, hypothetically possible that our government on that timeline, okay, that government had bugged every phone that was ever made of a certain make and model to then be able to dial into it. And then if you're a line technician, if you're a telephone operator, even if you open up the phone or you're just some random person and you're looking at the components of a broken phone, you would never know that it's an actual microphone that the government could dial into, because it was concealed in such a covert, clandestine way that you would not, even as a line engineer, you would not identify this particular piece of this phone as being a bug in phones throughout North America during that time, during the Cold War. Now, okay, that's one scenario. Obviously, that's not what it turns out to be, because it is actually a supercomputer. But that's one of the possibilities, is that, yeah, the room could have been bugged by way of these phones that were made. And then the government would type a certain code and they could dial into a certain area or a particular phone. But that's not what it turns out to be. What it turns out to be is, again, that it's a supercomputer that has found these children and is steering these children now in a certain direction that this computer needs for these children to proceed in this grand scheme of things, in this cosmic plan that this computer has for not just these children, but this particular timeline. What you then find out is that there are 5 other universes with 5 other super AI computer systems that have essentially outlived the humans that had been on that timeline. There are humanoids that exist. They are essentially transhumans, and there are pockets of humans left in those worlds. But those computers and those civilizations have reached a virtual extinction point. And the computers were designed to find a jump zone to an ideal Earth timeline that predates those timelines. And the reason is that the remaining survivors of those timelines, they're trying to leap back in time to an ideal Earth universe where everything can be rewritten, and that the mistakes that were made on those 5 different timelines or so, because I don't want to give it all away, those computers are trying to find an ideal timeline to jump to. And they find this this world line where these children are, which these supercomputers believe to be suitable and ideal, unequivocally, quintessentially, these timelines that are, that again predate these near extinction world lines. And some of the computers don't know that there are other timelines competing. In one or more of the universes, you find out those computers aren't aware that there are competitor universes trying to get to that one particular timeline. Some of the world lines, they are aware of the existence of other competing timelines. That's what then loops back to the beginning of the movie, the very, very beginning, where a chrononaut from one such universe had been sent in the flesh through a time tunnel to Mars to figure out first what happened on Mars before then what happened on Earth in that same universe.